think it's good for me to talk, and I think it's good for everyone to kind of get the side of the story that they want.
Former mommy vlogger Ruby Frankie is locked up behind bars, and the community is still reeling from the information released by Utah officials documenting Frankie's abuse against her own children, as well as their rescue from her business partner's home. But now, more family members are answering some lingering questions publicly. We're sitting down with KUTV 2 News' anchor and reporter Brian Schnee to look at some of these responses. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey, everybody, this is a Law&Crime legal alert. Google Incognito tracked users' browsing data without their knowledge, and Mass Tort Alliance, one of our legal sponsors, is helping users file for compensation due to Google misleading the privacy of their incognito browser. So if you've used Google Incognito anytime since 2016, you can start your claim in less than 10 questions at incognitoclaims.com/sidebar. Well, believe it or not, it has been 9 months since former YouTube sensation Ruby Franke and her self-help guru business partner Jody Hildebrandt were first arrested for horrific abuse against Ruby's 2 youngest children. And it has been 2 months since both women were sentenced to prison after they entered guilty pleas to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. They were sentenced in February to indeterminate amounts of time in prison, but we can expect them to be in there for at least several years, serving a maximum of 30. And since this is all blown up, we have been hearing responses. Now, remember, at the end of August 2023, Ruby's 12-year-old son escaped from the home of Jody Hildebrandt, ran to a neighbor's house, begging him to call 911.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could do 2 favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine.
What's going on, son? Have a seat there.
It's personal business.
Have a seat. What's your name? How'd you get here?
Now, the youngest child in the Franke family was still inside that massive home of Jody Hildebrandt's, and first responders found her in a closet.
I'm just gonna sit down. It's okay if I just sit here with you. We don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Okay? I'll just sit here with you. I'll put the screen, okay? Whenever you're ready, you can eat. There we go. Whew. Thanks, Scott.
An officer spent hours trying to coax the little girl out of that closet. Both the children were emaciated. They had wounds over their bodies. The young boy was found with duct tape on his wrists and ankles. Underneath that duct tape, a home remedy of cayenne pepper and honey slathered on to reportedly treat these rope burns. And all of this comes years after the Franke family was first introduced to the world via their 8 Passengers YouTube channel in 2015. It chronicled the lives of Ruby, her husband Kevin, their 6 children at their home in Utah for several years. This was before Ruby eventually stopped posting and YouTube removed the channel. You might recall that there had been accusations against Ruby for the way that she treated her children, some even going as far as to call social services. Ruby instead began appearing in videos with Jody Hildebrandt, a mental health therapist who is the face of the company called Connections. It offered group therapy sessions, one-on-one meetings, as well as online courses, a podcast, a video series. Ruby and Jody, they became closer, with Jody eventually moving in with the Frankes. During that time, Jody reportedly convinced Ruby to kick Kevin out of the home, saying he had to work on his own problems before he could rejoin the family. When Ruby and Jody were ultimately arrested at the end of August, according to Kevin, he had not seen Ruby nor any of his children in more than a year. All contact had been cut off, and Kevin says he knew nothing about the physical, emotional, and psychological abuse his kids were suffering. As for Ruby's 2 eldest children, Shari and Chad, they had moved away from the family home, while the 2 youngest were found at Jody's house in Ivins, Utah. The 2 middle daughters were found at the home of another Connections member, Pam Botcher, ostensibly to do chores around her home. Well, since then, the 4 youngest kids have been in the care of the Department of Children and Family Services, and it's our understanding Kevin has been actively trying to regain custody. Now, after the pleas and sentencing, Utah officials released a massive amount of evidence connected to the case. Not only was there body camera video showing Ruby and Jody's arrests, but there were interrogation room videos, jailhouse phone calls, even a journal that Ruby kept cataloging everything they did to the children. It was so much worse than I think many of us could have even imagined. But as I mentioned, we are talking responses. And so throughout this process, as this was all unfolding, information coming from inside the Frankie family has been relatively sparse. For example, Shari Frankie posted a photo of officers on the day of Ruby's arrest writing, "Finally." She posted that on Instagram. And then she also posted on Instagram, "Today has been a big day. Me and my family are so glad justice is being served. We've been trying to tell the police and CPS for years about this and so glad they finally decided to step up." We also heard from Jody Hildebrandt's niece, Jessie, who says that they were forced to live with Jody when they were a teenager, endured similar circumstances.
And she would tell me all the time, "If you just confess, I will stop. If you confess, I will stop," which is torture.
And Jessie would tell us that they didn't believe Jody really has any kind of remorse for what she did. But having said all of that, we have heard from other family members, including Kevin, Ruby's 3 sisters, and their oldest son, Chad. I want to dive into this right now with a friendly face, a familiar face here at Sidebar. KUTV 2 News' anchor, reporter, Brian Schnee. He's been covering this case from the very beginning, has been a frequent guest here on Sidebar, and has been so generous with his time. Brian, always good to see you. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. There's still more to talk about as it pertains to Ruby and Jody and where things go. And I'm sure this will not be the last time we talk about more developments throughout this case here, because it's not done. We still don't know how long exactly they will be spending in prison.
We don't know that. And there's always these developments, legal developments, and there's still so many questions rather than answers we have. But let's start off with Chad Frankie. Okay, so there have been a few sightings of him during court hearings and things like that, but Chad had never really gone on the record with any of his thoughts about his mom's arrest and the claims against her. But within the last few months, Chad has started to take to social media again, even making jokes about the situation. In one TikTok video, his then girlfriend is captioned as saying, "You'd love my mom." Then it cuts to Chad with the caption, "My mom's in prison." He's also posted videos of his older sister, Shari, showing the siblings spending quality time together. Brian, what's your thought on Chad Frankie and these initial responses? And we'll get into it a little bit more.
He's pretty loose with his responses, right? Especially if you go on to some of these live streams where he is gaming at the same time and getting all of these questions in the chat. This is on like a Twitch stream where he's gaming, talking to his gaming partners, and also talking about his personal life. And something that's really interesting is not really holding back with a lot of his thoughts about this, talking about what was Jody like? What were his interactions with Jody? I still haven't spoken to Chad, and I certainly haven't spoken to Shari. Those are her wishes, not to speak to someone of what I do. But at the same time, Chad has been very vocal just by answering questions from random folks online about this situation.
Let's show that. So Chad, he's gained this large following on Instagram, Snapchat, the streaming service Twitch. He's, like you said, he plays video games with his friends, girlfriend, and he answers questions from people posting in the chat.
I still get a lot of questions about my younger siblings. I'm just not even going to talk about them at all. They're still minors. They're still kind of in DCFS custody, so I'm not even gonna mention that.
And Brian, he talks about how he was in denial, how he was in shock when Ruby was arrested, how he lives with his dad, Kevin. What did you make of those comments?
I'm not surprised that he had to go through the processing sort of scenario that anybody would that has to deal with family trauma such as this. And I'm sure it's far from over too, Jesse. I mean, think about this. He's a young kid still, a young adult, trying to go through the motions of life here as this whole custody thing with his siblings is still not over. Still, at the end of the day, so much has already been made public with this situation. I think the fact that he's finding ways to cope with it and finding ways to at least have an outlet It may not be the way that I would do it or others would do it, but nonetheless, it falls in line with his lifestyle. And I think it's really interesting that he won't do this. He won't sit down and do this conversation. He prefers to be in the comfort of his room with the game controller in his hand, trying to achieve the goal of the game while just kind of rattling off these thoughts. And he's really not holding back from a lot of things. And we have learned a lot in just a short amount of time from him doing these video streams. A lot of people on, TikTok channels and other social media sites have really gravitated towards what Chad is saying and have been putting those things out there to add a little bit more clarity or color commentary to the situation, if that makes sense. But at the end of the day, it seems like he's doing well, at least from the outside, and is doing okay. And that's all, at least in my circumstance of covering the egregious acts of what mom did to the other kids. That's all I can hope for. I can just hope for a sense of normalcy. I mean, Chad was so involved in a lot of these YouTube videos. There was a lot of early emphasis on what happened to him in some of these videos, using those as examples before we saw the text come out from the journals and we learned exactly what happened to E&R those days. Chad seems to be doing well given the circumstances.
The whole idea of him sleeping on the beanbag was a big point of controversy. He said before on the streams that he really didn't even expect to talk about his personal life in such a public way. So maybe he started it not even thinking he would talk about it, but he said, like you said, he's found it therapeutic. And he once answered a very interesting question.
Have I visited Ruby in prison? I have not. I have not done that.
Are you going to?
If I did, it won't be for a long time. So,
such an interesting response. And during her sentencing hearing in February, Ruby took accountability for her actions, or seemed to, saying that she was brainwashed by Jody into thinking that this was the right thing to do for her kids and that it was the only way to save them. She apologized. She agreed that she deserved to spend time behind bars. So Chad was asked, what do you think about your mom's statement?
I'm going to be honest. I thought it was very genuine. I thought it was a little weird. It sounded like she was receiving an Oscar or something. That she was like thanking everyone in the audience. It was a little strange and it was super long. But I've seen her growing up and I've seen her be genuine and emotional, and what sounds real and what's not genuine. And I think that she was being very genuine in the sentencing hearing. I'm going to be honest.
So Brian, really interesting series of responses when he's asked about his mom. What's your take?
Well, I was in the courtroom that day when just off to my right, we're seating, Kevin, Chad, Sherry, and Ruby's brother was also there, Bo. So when she was reading that statement, I could see their reactions. And Kevin was emotional, watery-eyed, as you might expect. But Chad and Sherry were just like off in the distance, almost staring towards the judge, John Walton, and really stoic faces. And I'm not surprised, perhaps, that maybe he feels that way of, hey, I'm not visiting mom for a while because of what happened, but also in the same sense of he had to be there through this and he had to see what happened to his siblings. At the end of the day, I think there's probably the hope of what could I have done, right? You would imagine that maybe that thought has crossed his mind. It sounds like their relationship wasn't, just all flowers and roses and all that from the get-go. It almost feels like he gravitated more towards his father even before this, just by hearing him talk more about that. So at the end of the day, it was a long statement. She did thank everybody. She thanked the first responders. She thanked the prosecution. She thanked Kevin for the 20 plus years of marriage and obviously apologized in that. And of course, we can always go back to it. Was it genuine? Was it heartfelt? It appeared to be so from being in the courtroom, given what we saw early on. And then once the evidence was released, going back and seeing just the genuine change in body language from the day of the arrest to that months later, it did appear to be a change in character for Ruby Franke. So I do think Chad is onto something there.
It was a 180. It was a 180 from her giving the silent treatment to law enforcement to what she ended up saying. And look, Chad, he was also reportedly asked how long he thinks Ruby and Jody should spend in prison. He said, I think he said 18 years for Ruby, and he thinks Jody should never get out. In recent days, he's answered other questions on Twitch. What's your favorite food? Where do you want to travel? So maybe getting out of this different kind of questioning. I want to ask you about Ruby's sisters. So Ruby has these three sisters, Bonnie, Julie, and Ellie. And all four of these sisters had their own YouTube and or social media following. They often posted videos of their families, vacations they've taken, passion projects like building a dream home. You get the picture. So a family that has created a connection with the community through their posts. And when information started to come out about Ruby, there may have been an expectation that the sisters would put out some sort of statement. Well, Ruby and Jody, as I mentioned, they were arrested on August 30th. And Ellie and Julie, they released a statement on Instagram saying, for the last 3 years, we have kept quiet on the subject of our sister Ruby Frankie for the sake of our children, of her children, excuse me. Behind the public scene, we have done everything we could to try and make sure the kids were safe. We wouldn't feel right about moving forward with regular content without addressing the most recent events. Once we do, we will not be commenting on it further. Ruby was arrested, which needed to happen. Jody was arrested, which needed to happen. The kids are now safe, which is the number one priority. And less than 2 weeks later, I believe on September 13th, both Julie and Bonnie, they put out video statements on their YouTube channels. They explained that Ruby had grown distant from the family after joining Connections and that she kept her children away from family functions.
3 years ago, Ruby, everything was great. It seemed to be fine anyway. We were a typical family. She was getting some therapy counseling because their family needed it, which I think is great. However, I think you need to get it from a great source. Read the reviews. Jody Hildebrandt and her website or therapy style, I don't know what you want to call it, Connections, was not a great resource. And we all saw it. We all felt weird about this Jody lady. We weren't comfortable with it. We didn't like it. We didn't like the teachings Ruby was bringing to the family functions, and we were this close to telling her, if you come to our family events anymore, we do not want to hear what you were learning through Connections because we don't like it. We never did say that to her, but we thought it.
Behind the scenes, we did everything that we could. We did everything legally that we could do. And for those that were saying that they'd go in and bust down doors and do whatever it took to end up in jail, because from jail, I can't do anything.
Brian, again, fascinating responses from these sisters. What's your thoughts on those?
Well, most importantly for me is how have they responded since sentencing, right? And it's been very few and far between for at least two of them. One of them has been much more outspoken on this and more emotionally charged by this than the other, I guess the total of the three sisters, right? So Bonnie is the one that has gone on YouTube a number of times and put out videos. Most recently, just a few weeks ago, really talking about the emotion behind this. She was visibly upset by a lot of the comments coming in, attacks on her faith. A lot of those comments, she said, are religiously charged, which is, she said, I would never do that. That's not fair. Why would you do that to me? Of course, we're talking about, the dominant or heavily dominant religion here in Utah that a lot of people refer to as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or the LDS culture. So when you look at those comments, she's visibly emotional about this. What I found interesting is since then, these three sisters appear from the social media limelight that they've kind of gone about their business, continuing the vlogs, have gone on vacations, right? One of them is on a vacation at the time of we're talking right now or just wrapping it up. So I don't know how much more we will hear from them. I've continuously, over the course of a few months, tried to reach out and said, hey, would you like to talk about this? And at one point, Julie got back and said no. No responses from the others, Ellie or Bonnie, but Bonnie still puts out these videos every so often. And she just did a few weeks ago, again, about just kind of dealing with this still months later, in essence saying, I'm not okay still, right? Mm-hmm. And you would expect that. But then again, when you look way back towards the beginning of this, when we started hearing about these YouTube videos and potential abuse, even outlined in some of the early videos, there were comments about, well, what did Bonnie do on her page way back when? There were things about that. So at this point, I don't know how much we're still going to hear from them too, because at what point will they take this in stride and move on towards their traditional vlogging lifestyle? It seems like two of them have, but at the end of the day, it looks like Bonnie might be the one to hang on to this and continue addressing what people are talking about, because we still haven't gotten a lot of clear-cut answers from all the sisters. Something Bonnie said, though, in her most recent video stuck out to me. Jesse, you know the journals that we've seen that were released and outlines by date This child was sleeping on the floor next to me. This child was outside. This one threw herself into a cactus. The stuff you never want to read surrounding this case. Bonnie alludes to the redactions. If only you could see what is in those blacked out pieces in the journals, right? And we can't. So she even alludes to, you've only seen what's in the media. You've only seen what's been made public. You have no idea what else is in there or surrounds this. She still has a lot to say as far as it's concerned. I believe she does.
Let's actually play that if we can, that moment where you're just talking about.
You only know what's been approved to share with the media. All of those blocked out spots in the journal, all of the journals that she had that didn't necessarily pertain to the criminal case, all of those, you know a fraction. You know a fraction.
Yeah, so that's quite the statement. And just to go back to give everybody a little context, so Ellie, she posted a video, I think, in November, talking about the state of her mental health as well as the relationships with her and her own family following this arrest. And it was so interesting. She posted a video about a ring that her grandmother had given her that she took to a jeweler to replicate.
And I said, I want you to replicate the ring. And so he replicated it just like my grandma's ring. But he left it so it's easy to size. And I had a ring made for me, Bonnie, Julie, and my mom. And when my mom gets back from her mission, she will be able to have it. And we will have matching rings.
Yeah, you notice she mentions her mom, her sisters, Julie and Bonnie, but not Ruby. And then you mentioned Bonnie, as you said, is the most frequent to post. In October, she talked about how her children didn't get to have meaningful relationships with their cousins, but maybe one day down the line they can.
It was a loss for my children, and so that took a lot of time to come to terms with. And years later, that sounds so wild to say, but years later, they still bring it up, and when are we going to get to see them? When do we get to know them again? And I had just let them know so that they had some sort of expectation. I just said, when they're 18, when you're 18, you'll be able to reach out and you'll be able to see if you can form a relationship then.
And on her Instagram page, Bonnie posted this following the February sentencing: a world full of distractions and I only have eyes for them. Satan himself could not come close to making me harm them. This is about her own children. And then a few days later, on March 1st, Bonnie posted a video with the caption, "This was the day my sister was sentenced. I thought I would feel more closure. I didn't. It only added to my frustration. I will take this as a massive blessing and a sign that God is in control. He knows me and was acknowledging me." Yeah, her pain is very, 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 very palpable. And yes, we might see a little bit more. But I want to end this discussion, Brian, with Kevin Franke. So Ruby's estranged husband filed for divorce not long after arrest, has filed a lawsuit against Jody Hildebrand for abusing his children. So we're hearing a bit more of his side of the story through his legal action. Kevin has never been charged with anything in connection with this case. He has said time and time again that he was away from his entire family for more than a year, no contact at all. But in the legal complaint that Kevin's lawyer, Randy Kester, filed, it states, quote, "Neither defendant nor Ruby Franke advised plaintiff," meaning him, "of the removal of the children from the family home in Springville, Utah, the defendant's home in Ivins, Utah." Goes on to say the children's personalities, emotions, and psyches were so damaged and altered that it was beyond father's capability to restore them without professional intervention of state's resources through the juvenile court. This through a rehabilitation and restorative process directed and prescribed by the professionals treating the children. In order to restore his children to his care in their family home, father himself has complied with the court process and has affirmatively sought his own regimen of professional therapy in order to coordinate not only with the children's treatment providers, but to gain an understanding of his children's conditions and needs and how to best facilitate the restoration of his children back to their former status as happy and healthy individuals and of a happy and intact family in their family home. And he accuses Jody, and actually the claims are intentional and negligent infliction of emotional distress. Brian, what do we make of Kevin's responses to all of this? And have you heard anything new regarding Kevin Franke?
Well, last we heard was of course, the filing towards Jody, which we thought would happen based on the ability to get custody of the children, because they want to prove, hey, we can get this going. And there's a slowdown with the state's process to get those 4 children in terms of the guardianship for Kevin Franke. So when you look at this, it also is financial too, right? I mean, he needs some assistance. The bank is running dry. We've been going through therapy. All these kids need therapy. Where is this coming from? We have a $5.3 million home in Ivins. Where's that money going? Looking at the bigger picture, at the end of the day, Kevin probably feels, hey, I need some of this for my family, right? Because where is the income coming from other than Kevin working, which he is still doing? So this portion is to not only hopefully tell the court, hey, I'm serious about this. I want these children. And I think that this is why I should be entitled to not only the children, but some financial assets from this as well. I don't know how quickly this will help move things along. I think that's part of the goal, though. And at this point, yes, where does this complaint go? Does it get addressed quickly? How does that happen with Jody in prison? Obviously, her representation is in St. George with her attorney, Doug Terry. So where do we go from here where Kevin gets a little bit of that closure, whether it's emotionally or financially, which he says is to ultimately help the family and the children? So now we wait, I think, at this point.
Brian Schnee, thank you so much, my friend, for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Always great to chat.
And that's all we have for you here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.